Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Scott.
What's going on?
Well, we're going to talk about Pinnacle Overlanders. What can you buy today and literally leave the lot and drive around the world?
Like, we're big fans of the G-Wagon. The G-Wagon has global motor packages now in the United States. We don't get the turbo diesel engines. We never have. I mean, I guess until relatively recently in the car's history, we never even got the G-Wagon. But if you buy a new G-Wagon today, you can get that serviced with a mechanic that actually knows what's going on in Kazakhstan or Cambodia or wherever, because Mercedes International Service and International Parts Network is, better than Toyota. People always think Toyota is the best, but, Toyota uses a lot of, regional drivetrain packages. Let's think of the Tacoma, for example. It has that 3.5 liter Atkinson cycle engine, which that engine is primarily built for the US. I want to say in Japan, it's in the Toyota Alphard. You're not going to find a windshield when you break it somewhere.
Yep.
And you're not going to be able to fix that engine without air freighting parts in. And a lot of times that's just not an option. I mean, people think we live in this really connected world, but you're going to end up in a lot of countries where used car parts or car parts have a 500% tariff.
Right.
And they're going to get held up at customs for a week or 2 weeks. I know friends that were in South America that were had to fly back and smuggle a transmission in with them because I think they were in Colombia or something. And it wasn't an option.
It was cheaper to fly home, get the parts they needed and fly back. And that's the reason why we're focusing on these truly being Pinnacle, which means, does it meet all of the minimum requirements that we have for an overland vehicle for international travel, which means, does it have sufficient payload? Is it capable in technical terrain? Does it have a reputation of durability and reliability? And if you look within every brand, there's going to be a vehicle that rises to the top in that regard, even in the United States. I mean, we don't get some of the coolest overland vehicles in the world. We don't get a Y61 Patrol. We don't get a 70 series Land Cruiser, but we do get vehicles that are Pinnacle Overlanders that are available in most countries of the world. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason why we really want to focus on models that are available around the globe is because of service and support. One of the cool things about a Mercedes, if you buy a new G-Wagon, you actually not only have your warranty that's good for however many months and however many miles in your home country, but it's also good for 12 months unlimited miles globally. So you could drive your new G-Wagon into South Africa and rock up at the dealership in Joburg and actually get the truck properly serviced. And that's actually a huge advantage. When we did the big trip with the 70 series trucks, when we went to all 7 continents, Toyota provided us with that same kind of a support. They said for 24 months, you've got service and support at any dealership. Now, of course, we never needed it because they were 70s. Because they were 70 series. Yeah, because they were Land Cruisers. We literally never needed to go to a dealership for a repair. We did lots of oil changes, but we never needed to have anything fixed. I mean, I don't even think a piece of plastic broke, but those are certainly exceptional vehicles. But when we look at what's available in the United States, I think it's kind of important to start with what is arguably the most Pinnacle vehicle available in the United States, which is the 200 series Land Cruiser.
Yeah. I think people need to realize how cheap Land Cruisers are here.
Yeah.
They are 25 or 30% more expensive in Australia. They're cheap here, and we get top spec Land Cruisers. What we're paying for something with air conditioned seats internationally would be called a Sahara spec. You're probably getting the working model. Overseas. Some people will complain about that. I will just smile and take the air conditioned seats.
Yeah.
But the point being,
it's not a reason not to buy the car.
Yeah, exactly. Like the point being with the 200 series, whether, you're getting the luxury version here in the United States or, the UN spec version, in Africa, they're the same bones underneath. That 5.7 motor is pretty phenomenal. Like, I don't know anybody that's ever had issues with it. There are going to be countries where that engine just was not available, where maybe the Mercedes is better for availability. But I would argue all day that for what you're losing with the small amount of decrease in availability from Toyota, you're making up in reliability.
Yeah, you absolutely are. And Toyota does have the most prolific dealer network, only followed by very closely by Mercedes. If you look at any developing country, even a third world country, there are bureaucrats in those places that want to drive new Mercedes. It's a status symbol. So you do find good Mercedes infrastructure throughout the world. And I think the 5.7 actually has a couple advantages. The biggest disadvantage is fuel economy. Yes. If you were to get the VDJ 200, which is the twin turbo 4.5 liter V8 diesel, that is going to have about 40% better fuel economy.
Yeah, and it can be significant.
And it can be tuned to even better than that, while also gaining performance. So you can get very close to the same acceleration performance of the 5.7 out of that diesel while also maintaining much better fuel economy. But we don't get that. We don't get that motor.
And that diesel is an ultra low sulfur engine.
It is. And so even if we got that diesel, it would be more limiting for international travel than the 5.7 would be. So I think we're at this crossroads where we just kind of got to accept gasoline engines for a while, and maybe even for long term. If you look at how efficient the new Ranger is with turbocharging,
a 2-liter engine that's almost 300 horsepower.
That's right. Turbocharging, 10-speed automatic transmissions. All of that is really also improved fuel economy and reduced emissions. And it's funny, people will often say, oh, you always want diesel because it's the fuel that's going to be available everywhere. In my experience as a traveler, that is true to some degree, but I've never found gasoline to be less available. And the reason for that is because all of the locals ride motorcycles. Motorcycles don't run on diesel.
Yeah.
Scooters in the middle of the jungle in Vietnam, you may not see an over the road truck. Yeah. You may not even be able to access the village by a truck.
Like Land Cruisers are luxury vehicles, even when they're used in a utility sense in a less fortunate country. Gas, people are driving Kias. They're driving, Chinese cars that we haven't even heard of most of the time. And generally they're all gasoline engines.
A lot of them are. And so fuel availability has never been an issue. When I drove across the Silk Road in that little Jimny, that was a gasoline truck. Yeah. I mean, in the deepest, darkest Tajikistan, I still could find gas.
Should we have a Jimny on this list?
Yeah. I know.
They're really space efficient, but we don't get them.
We don't get them. I know.
I guess, maybe on the international list.
But, we'll have to talk about that.
But back to the 200, I mean, you're looking at something. I mean, Scott, I remember a while ago, you told me you were talking with a Land Cruiser engineer.
Yeah.
And they said that the 200 was the strongest Land Cruiser that they had ever made.
That's true. It was actually the lead engineer for Land Cruiser when I was at the Nagoya plant. And he reinforced the fact that the Land Cruiser is their pinnacle truck. It's the one that's the most durable. The front end, even though it's independent suspension, is significantly stronger than a 70 series. And I would say that for me, it's the 200 series is the one vehicle that I've literally flip-flopped my opinion on. When that vehicle first came out in 2008, I appreciated it for what it was, but we were still in the era that the 80 series was the answer to everything. And you could still buy low mileage 80 series Land Cruisers because they would have only been 10 years old when the 200 came out. And the 100 series is obviously a very excellent vehicle as well. But I remember when the 200 came out, it felt round and it felt soft and it felt too
like
big.
A Highlander.
It felt too big and it felt somewhat soulless, but a lot has changed in the market in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
A lot of those vehicles that were boxy and cool have changed. They've gone away. And when you look at it now, the 200 series is like, that would absolutely be a vehicle I would buy and leave and drive around.
Yeah, I think it's a smart purchase. They're obviously quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say they're about 80 to 90 now.
$80,000, yeah.
But you're getting something that will have great resale. You'll drive it around the world and it'll still be worth something.
Yep.
I think there's some vehicles out there that just won't put up with the lifetime of punishment. And you kind of touched on the 80 and the 100. We're not saying that those aren't bad choices, but what we're saying is that the 80 series is almost a classic car.
Yeah.
Like I have one. I love it. That's the car that I take on my serious trips. But a Toyota dealer is not going to stock parts for a 25-year-old car.
No. And they're going to be hard. They're going to be hard parts to find. And you start to get outside of the operational window of even a Land Cruiser. Land Cruisers are designed to be reliable at that 500,000 mile mark. Once you get over 20 years or so, all the wiring becomes brittle, all of the rubber and the seals and the
everything,
pesky heater hose and all that other stuff.
And the parts are not cheap.
They're not cheap.
They're great vehicles, but I would just take a 200 now. They're very capable.
And it's not to discourage anybody from buying or driving what they want. I just think that we have to get out of that mindset that the 80 series is the solution for driving around the world. Yeah. There are better choices today for that exercise. And it would, at the top of my list personally, would be the 200 series.
Yeah, I think push comes to shove out of everything we're going to talk about today. Yeah, I would still choose G-Wagon.
So why would you pick the G-Wagon? What I mean, you and I, we both drive cars like that. And what's your thought on the G-Wagon?
I don't know exactly. It's hard to pinpoint. I think that of all of the vehicles on this list that are actively being used by, the G-Wagon's the only one that's actively being used by militaries. It's the only one that has international, like true international serviceability in a lot of countries. Here the G-Wagon is that Post Malone wrote a song about it. Like it's kind of a hippity hop Kardashian car, but underneath it's the same thing that the Canadian military is using.
Yep.
It's the same thing that the Australian military is using. It's the same thing that a lot of European militaries use. It is legit. I mean, there's 4 different body coatings that go onto the body of that vehicle before it's painted. Right. They're all hand assembled. They've been in production for so long, and they're built
since
in
the
Austria.
late 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a vehicle. I don't know. I'm a car guy. Too. I'm a traveler first, but I am still a car guy. And the G-Wagon to me is like, it's the best resto mod vehicle ever made. When you have something that was sold at the same time as the FJ40,
right? That
you can get with a twin turbo V8 if you want.
Yep.
With a warranty. I've always had these sugar pumps in my head that I drive around the world in like one of Jonathan Ward's icon FJs. But what's actually better than that is a new G-Wagon.
Yeah.
You have that classic shape, this is how you sit in the car. An 1,800 pound payload,
right?
Factory winch bumpers available, factory snorkels, factory roof racks, everything. I just think, to be honest, the other vehicle that would really be on my list would be a Jeep Wrangler, but that roll cage inside makes the inside so space inefficient. And a very low payload. I mean,
yeah. If you took a new Rubicon, like Dan Greck's a great example. He's someone that used a Wrangler appropriately for long distance travel. Most of the people that I see preparing Wranglers for overland travel overbuild the car, they overweight the car, and then they end up with a lot of problems. And we've talked about this before in the podcast, but if you're driving across Australia in an overloaded vehicle, they're going to impound your truck.
I mean, they in very remote places, they have weigh stations.
They do.
You will get defected. Your vehicle will get towed.
Yep.
And they're not going to care if it's registered in another country.
Yeah, they won't. I mean, you're just going to have to find a dumpster and start unloading stuff that's making your vehicle, including the rear bumper and the rock sliders and all that other stuff. You have to, with the Jeep Wrangler, is the Wrangler even worth talking about now that the Gladiator is available? I mean, the
Gladiator is the solution.
I think if you were to look at, I guess to wrap up on the G-Wagon, the downside of the G-Wagon is it is extremely expensive because of the content that they've chosen to include in the North American market.
Yes.
And that's the one thing that's disappointing about the G-Wagon. In other markets of the world, you can get a 350 Blue Tech diesel model, still with cloth interior, where it's decontented. It's the same exact car, same exact diff locks, all of the robustness that comes with a 463 G-Wagon, but it's decontented where it's not only more affordable, it's more efficient. It's easier to work on because it's not so complicated. In North America, we get very complicated up-contented versions of the G-Wagon. And that is certainly a downside. So you have to make a huge investment. If you look at a new 2019 G550, you're going to spend 160 to 180 grand.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, if you can find one. You might have to even pay over MSRP for the car.
Yeah, I've heard people paying $50,000 over sticker.
Yeah,
because since that vehicle has that international warranty, they can be exported.
Yeah, and that's why they do export them.
Yeah,
all over the place.
Like the used vehicles that we buy. So the United States is the largest market for G-Wagons. We're also the cheapest place in the world to buy a G-Wagon.
Yep.
So you're talking about the professional edition that there's no carpet. It's very utilitarian. That vehicle is more expensive in euros converted than a G550 was,
sure.
At least for the 463.
Yeah, sure.
In 2019 in the US, they made an update to the G-Wagon, added independent front suspension, which still fully locked. It's honestly a better vehicle.
Yeah. So like we've gone through Toyota Pinnacle Vehicle 200 series for sure. Mercedes G-Wagon easily, because it's the only option.
Yeah.
With Toyota, you could say, what about the 4Runner? Or what about, and it's not to say that a 4Runner isn't appropriate to go around the world. It's that the Land Cruiser is more robust. It's also available in nearly every country of the world. And that's why it wins. It doesn't mean that a GX 460 isn't a great vehicle. It absolutely is. And that platform, the 150 platform, is used in many countries around the world.
I think there's more of an argument for the 460 than there is for the 4Runner. I go back to really simple things. What happens when somebody breaks into your car and you need a new driver's side window?
That's right.
What happens when you are driving down a dirt road and a truck kicks up a massive rock into your windshield and it's spidered and you can't see, like you can't.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to find a windshield or a side window for a 4Runner anywhere outside of North America. Yeah. I mean, even in Mexico, I think he'd struggle. But again, I mean, that's why those vehicles, they're notable. They're not a terrible choice. They're just not like, if you're setting out to spend a long time on the road, I mean, you are a legitimate overlander that wants to go experience countries. You don't want to spend a week of your time finding a windshield, because it's going to happen. I mean, I remember when you guys did the E7 trucks and they first came over and we were building them, there was multiple windshields in them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's what occurred to me. I'm like, yeah, because if you bust a windshield in the US or Canada,
how do you get a new one?
Yeah. And I know people think that those details are small, but it is the small details that really make things. I mean, Jeep Gladiator, the Jeep Wrangler is sold, I mean, I don't want to say everywhere.
It's very popular, much more
really
popular than it used to be. Yeah. Now, once they came out with a 4-door, it became a solution for a lot of folks. They still haven't been widely adopted in places like Australia, because it really is Toyota country, but they're very popular in Europe and they're reasonably priced. I actually think that, I think Dan Grech has done a great job of reinforcing why a Jeep is still a good solution. He had very little issues with his vehicle in Africa, no matter what fuel he encountered. His was a gas model, of course. But if you look at the Gladiator, now the Gladiator solves all the problems, because you can put any version of a camper or just a topper on the back. You can have a 1,700 pound payload, which is about 600 pounds more than a typical Wrangler.
Yeah.
700 pounds in some cases as well, and a lot of capability. And it's a big vehicle, but it's not an overly wide vehicle.
It's within a foot of length of my 80 series.
Yeah.
And that's just because, I can fit a 37-inch spare underneath the factory position.
Yeah.
If I want to fit a spare that's larger on my 80 series, I've had to buy a Kmart bumper, which sticks out and the tire sticks out more.
Yep.
If you want to add a winch, you have to add a winch bumper, which means that front bumper sticks out a little bit more.
Right.
They're not, and don't quote me on a foot, but they're not that much different.
Yeah. I mean, they are a long vehicle, but they're still going to fit in a container. They're still going to go down most roads in colonial cities because they're not overly wide. Once you get up into full size truck territory, once the width becomes a consideration, like if you look at most small villages in the world, or even cities, crowded cities in the world, they still need to have service and infrastructure brought into those cities and those villages. And that's where you see the Mitsubishi Fuso FG. You see these medium duty trucks, cab over, and they're very narrow. They have a huge payload, but they're very narrow vehicles. Yeah. They're actually narrower than a full size domestic pickup. And that's where the Gladiator actually becomes a great choice. Like right now, you can buy a 3.6 Gladiator with, a great transmission, 1,700 pound payload, Dana 44 axles, front and rear. Yeah. It's designed to tow a considerable amount of weight if you chose to tow something around the world. I think a Gladiator would actually be a great choice to leave.
Yeah, I mean, I think vehicles, if you would have asked me to drive a very early JK around the world, maybe I would have had a little bit of anxiety, although Dan Grech didn't have a single issue.
Nothing, yeah.
11,000 miles on mine. I mean, in fact, Laura, my partner, she's out in New Mexico with the thing right now. And, we get, if I don't drive aggressively, I can get 17 miles to the gallon on 37s with a camper.
That's amazing.
Using cheap fuel. And I don't have to worry about diesel exhaust fluid. I don't have to worry about any of those things. It did just come out with a diesel Wrangler, and we will see that engine in the Gladiator.
Yep.
But other than additional range, I don't know. I mean, until we solve that problem with ultra low sulfur diesel, which is going to happen faster than you think.
It will happen quickly. And also, diesels they drive great off road too. I mean, they develop so much torque at low RPMs, throttle modulation, and that ability to kind of effortlessly cross terrain. I remember just testing the difference between a Bison with a diesel and the ZR2 with a gas motor. It is a lot different. The tip in with a gas motor is a lot more aggressive.
Yeah.
It's not, when it's in low range, it's a lot more difficult to modulate.
Yeah.
Diesels are just a pleasure to drive.
Yeah.
Especially small displacement turbo diesels, which is just a type of motor that I've come to love personally. And it's a little bit sad. We've got the Chevrolet Bison now, which has front and rear lockers, is fantastic suspension, a 1,500 pound payload and a diesel motor. And you'd kind of think for a second, like, oh, is that actually the best choice to drive around the world? And for like this hot minute, it's probably not. You're probably better off getting a gas version of the same truck.
But here's the cool thing is in 5 years, when the entire world, this is hypothetical, is on ultra low sulfur diesel, because it's happening. Eventually you'll hit a critical mass where the refineries won't have the economy of scale to make these countries, Venezuela and that kind of stuff. They're gonna do their own thing. But imagine in 5 years when that Bison's $20,000.
Yeah.
And
be such a great choice.
Just buy it and go. I mean, the Sprinter, I so wish a Sprinter could be on here.
Yeah.
But
they're worth talking about for sure.
Yeah. I'm sure
super popular.
I'm sure there's a solution from the factory to get rid of that requirement for the AdBlue or the DEF. The Sprinter is great because you have interior living space, which is huge. Right. And I think they're a realistic look at the capability you'll actually need from a 4-wheel drive system while you're overlanding. I think there's specific trips that require, maybe something a little bit more technically capable. But for most people, 90% of the time you're going to be on roads. You're tackling, roads that people are driving in regular cars every day. I just think the Sprinter is super realistic. I think if I was to do it all over again and I wasn't going to do a Gladiator and it was just a North American truck, I think I would do a Sprinter, and I'd do one of those Winnebago Revels. I know there's some things I'd have to fix on it.
Yeah, sure.
But I know people that are trying to get their Sprinters built by independent companies, and they're $200,000 and a 2-year wait list. I can go buy a brand new Revel right now for $120,000.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting the Sprinter, and then doing some off-road modifications to it, and then slowly building out the interior.
Yeah.
Based upon what I find my needs really are.
Yeah.
I think I would probably go that route. And I think part of it is because I love the idea of being able to load a motorcycle up in the back.
Yes.
So or anything, go to Home Depot or whatever. It's kind of what I use.
Really practical.
It's kind of what I use the Defender for now. It's like my Home Depot truck, but it is really practical. And I do like the Sprinter. It's funny. The more that I travel, the more I realize like the idea of being able to retreat in from bad weather is appealing. And that's where the camper, at least for me as a traveler, starts to make a lot more sense. Is, having been in really crappy weather in Iceland for days and days and days at a time, or pick any other country. It is fatiguing when you can't get away from that. And something like a Sprinter is a pretty awesome way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, close the door, you're done.
Yeah.
You could park it in a city, people are going to know. I mean, guys, like I used to live in Fruita, Colorado. It's like a mountain bike van life mecca.
Yeah.
And they all kind of roll in and they're like, oh, I'm in my white Sprinter. People think it's just a delivery van.
Yeah.
No.
A delivery van with like brand new BF Goodrich all-terrains and a winch bumper. Yeah.
Yeah. Like delivery. Yeah. There's no such thing as a $200,000 custom delivery van.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think the idea of the stealth camping where nobody really knows, unless you're putting Bob's Plumbing on the side.
That ship has sailed.
Ship's sailed, especially
10 years ago, you could get away from it, get away with it. But there's been a lot of like counter movement in this like boondocking and and people just camping wherever they want until you ride right on the street. I mean, but a van is a great way to do that because it is much lower profile. Once you set up a roof tent, it's
I think it's like probably if you're going to do it, the most respectful way to do it, as long as you're self-contained.
Yeah.
People, oh, what's the problem with me camping there? Well, there's no problem with you camping there. It's just the fluids that have to find a way.
Yeah, that's right.
Somewhere. So
totally. But I do like the idea of the Sprinter, and they are very popular all over the world. They're sold in most countries. There is good dealer infrastructure and support. And you do, especially in other countries, you will fly a little more under the radar. When you're just driving down the road, it's not going to be this like amazing Gladiator on 37s. It's going to be.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's my biggest problem with the G-Wagon, I think I could imagine driving like a flat black twin turbo G-Wagon or something in Uganda. And maybe that's not the nicest thing to do.
Maybe not, but it's also very effective too.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone in Uganda that drives a matte black G-Wagon is someone that no one's going to mess with.
Yeah.
Like even someone that doesn't know what a G-Wagon is knows what a truck like that means. Like if you go into Russia, I mean, I guess the only problem you'd have in Russia is that the other guy with a matte black G-Wagon might think you're encroaching on his territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is at times there is an advantage to driving a vehicle that's highly disruptive, right? Because and I'm not advocating for the display of wealth or luxury. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's about being disruptive as a traveler when you come into an area with high security problems. Like what we did with Expedition 7 is we had several identically placarded vehicles that looked like an NGO or it looked like an ambulance.
Yeah.
It had a large chevron on the door. It had chevrons down the side that looked very much like an ambulance. The whole idea, it's not to be deceptive. It's just to be disruptive enough where the local criminal doesn't try it. They don't even make an effort to do a carjacking or to break into your vehicle.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think we should talk about the Tacoma and like the Frontier too. Like these aren't bad choices. I wouldn't consider them pinnacle choices. I know I'll have a million people on the internet yell at me if I don't say that, the Tacoma is an option.
And it has been an option for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They are still popular to use for international travel. They're a gasoline engine.
Yes.
Very reliable platform overall. There are some functional issues with the vehicle that make it perform at a standard that I consider below pinnacle now. Primarily the transmission ratio choices that Toyota went with. It once you start to load them up, I would actually almost say that they're dangerous, because they just don't respond properly when you're trying to make a left-hand turn. For example, if they're totally stock, they accelerate fine and you don't even notice it. But once you start to put them at payload, at maximum payload, they respond much differently, even with stock diameter tires.
I think Nitro recommends like 488s for them or something. And I think they have 373s. I mean, that's a significant jump in gearing.
And that's what it needs. And all Toyota really needs to do with the vehicle is just adjust the first and second gear ratios.
Yeah.
The first gear ratio on the Tacoma transmission is in the high 3s, and whereas the Gladiator is a 5-to-1 first gear.
Yeah.
It's an enormous difference.
Yeah.
And that results in driver confidence. Like, as manufacturers, I think they've lost the way on how the vehicles interact with the driver. When a vehicle does certain things right, it gives the driver confidence, and that gives the person, it inspires them to buy another one. It gives them a good experience while they're driving it. And that first and second gear ratio choice on the newest model Tacoma was a miss.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I hold out for the Tacoma is that is the first generation, I guess, of the third generation, even though it's really close to the second generation. I think that's also a failing Toyota had. There's always the glimmer of hope they'll go to a world model, because the Hilux internationally, when that received its update, that was essentially a rebody of the previous generation. So, if Toyota threw an 8-speed in that instead of a 6-speed, they'd probably solve a lot of their problems.
Problem solved.
If they added 20 horsepower, problem solved. I mean,
20 foot-pounds of torque is what I'd take.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to happen. I think that's where I'm excited for the Tacoma. Is it's inevitable. I mean, they're going to have to give it a little bit more power, and they know that they have maybe an issue, but I mean, that they sell like hotcakes. So they actually have an issue?
They sell 200,000 units a year. It's a very logical choice for a lot of people. I think it's curious, because people who are listening to this podcast that own a Tacoma will probably feel like we're being critical of their car. What's actually happened, the thing that's changed, is that we have options now.
Yeah.
So the third generation Tacoma, if it was out 5 years ago, it would still be like, we would have it on this list. We would say it's a pinnacle truck. But if you were to compare it against the new Bison is a better vehicle. If you compare it against the Gladiator is a better vehicle. Now, I'm not saying that they're more reliable, even though there are a lot of reliability indicators that do speak very positively of the GM products now. I think that the Tacoma just now has a lot of competition, and Toyota's an incredible brand. They're going to figure it out. They're going to be like, all right, sales are starting to shift towards our competitors. We're losing market share. Yeah. We have an opportunity to tune the vehicle in a way now that addresses those competitive pressures.
Yeah. And I think that they're very expensive.
They are.
No,
the guy who just bought a Gladiator.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what everybody says to me, right? So my full disclosure, my Gladiator has all the leather. It's loaded, whatever. I'm not saying this to gloat, just as a position thing. It was 62.
I think it was the only model though that you could buy. It was the only
model that I could buy that early. My VIN's very, very early, but I have a winch compatible steel front bumper that has wings that can be removed. I have a 4-to-1 low range. I have locking differentials front and rear. It came with Fox shocks. It has sliders. It has a steel rear bumper with sliders. And it came with 411s, which for up to 35s is totally sufficient. What would it cost you if you're going to go down the more modified 4-wheel drive route? What would, and this is the Rubicon, so it has the appearance stuff. It has the hood. What would it cost for you to put a TRD Pro, which is $45,000, and they're selling, I believe, still selling for over sticker for some reason.
They're a great truck.
They're a great truck, but $45,000-$50,000, and then you add, what's a bumper cost? What do sliders cost?
Yeah.
What does a rear bumper cost? Because you're going to have to mount that tire somewhere, and then you're going to have to re-gear. The Gladiator becomes a value.
Yeah, it does. And I think the only thing that gives it a little bit of a challenge is the Bison, because the Bison's about $7,000 less.
Yeah.
And it does,
sure.
and it does have front and rear lockers and even a diesel engine, which, the Gladiator will come out with soon enough. But, when we think about these pinnacle vehicles, when you look at a pickup, I would be really inclined, if I was going to look at a mid-sized truck, I'd be really inclined towards a Bison with a gasoline motor right now. That would probably be what I would take around the world. And another option I would seriously consider would be a Frontier.
Yeah, I mean, they're affordable.
They're so affordable. They're a
global platform.
Yeah, they are. I mean, a lot has changed with the Navara and other markets. And I know that Nissan is right at the doorstep of a model change for that vehicle as well. But it is the most reliable vehicle of its class in the US right now. It's more reliable than the Tacoma, has fewer problems per 1,000 vehicles. It is a much better choice for reliability. It
mystifies me why the new Navara overseas is not sold here. Because they're, the D40, I want to say that what we're still getting is that hasn't been sold overseas for some time.
Long time.
I went to the press launch for the new Navara in Australia in 2015. I was told there it'd be in the US in, a year or so. But that chassis is phenomenal. It's coil sprung in the rear.
Yeah.
It's really well balanced. I mean, it's so good. It's actually what Mercedes chose to base their X-Class off of. And Mercedes is
very
crazy particular with dynamics. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good choices out there.
There are. I think the interesting thing about the Frontier, when I was talking with some of the program managers recently, is they're selling more of them than they have even 3 years ago. So like they sell almost 80,000 Frontiers a year. That's a lot. That's a lot of trucks.
On a car that they did their tooling 15 years ago.
Yeah. They sell twice as many Frontiers as Ford sells Rangers.
Yeah.
And that's because they come across as a great value. They come across as very honest. They come across as very capable. You can get a Pro 4X with a rear locker and a large diameter tire. It has a larger displacement engine that has the best torque in its class. And these are a lot of things that compel people to buy them. And if you go onto the website and you look at the MSRP, they sell for much less than that.
Yeah.
So like if you go to the
sticker for a Tacoma.
Yeah. You're going to pay sticker for a Tacoma. You're going to pay $3,000 to $5,000 off sticker for a Frontier.
And a Colorado and a Ranger.
Starts to be very, very compelling as far as a value. Well, let's talk about full-size trucks. What do you think? Is there anything that falls in that category anymore?
If we set aside that ultra low sulfur diesel thing and the diesel exhaust fluid thing, yeah, the F-250 is a great choice. I mean, I took mine everywhere. I mean, it's big.
Yeah.
But I always said if she fits, she gets.
Yeah.
Like, you can put massive tires on those things. They have the drive line, a lot of times, even with large tires, they don't really require gearing.
Sure.
But I think of full-size trucks. And then there's the F-150. I mean, a very solid choice would be buy an F-150, throw a 4-wheel camper in the back and just go.
Yeah.
But the Rams, fantastic. I mean, you can actually buy a Ram that I don't want to say bypasses the DEF because it still has DEF. Mario just bought that. It was an ambulance commercial chassis. It will run completely legally since it is a commercial vehicle. It won't go into limp home mode, which can be super valuable.
Yeah.
It has 2 fuel tanks. I want to say it was like, I think he paid $40,000 for that thing.
Yeah.
With the
under $50,000
Cummins diesel. And now you're going to have to do some modification to that. But if you're going to do a flatbed or anything like that, those are great. Yeah. You can check his out. AT Overland. He has big boxes on it.
Yep.
That'll be an interesting project to watch. I mean, going back to SEMA, my favorite truck at SEMA was AEV's new 2500 Prospector.
So sweet.
In that cool green color, the bumper. They finally did a little bit more brush guard style, which I like for animal strike protection. Man, that was really cool.
Totally agree. New rear bumper, spare tire mount. That thing looked literally ready to go around the world.
Yeah. The thing I say about the full size trucks in comparison to my Gladiator, where do you put that tire? You have to have a bumper or something. Because it's funny that my Gladiator will fit a 37 underneath.
Yeah.
And a full size truck won't.
Right.
A friend of mine has a wedge style camper on his 2500. Now he's a 6.5 foot bed. I have a 5 foot bed on my Gladiator, but I have completely vertical walls and I don't have to have my tire inside the bed.
Right.
So, granted you could do a swing away, but swing aways are kind of few and far between for full size trucks. And
there's a lot of details in the Gladiator that I really respect.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows, Mark Allen, obviously it comes back to the guy that's in charge of design, and Mark Allen is an Overlander. He does it. Like he's been a subscriber to Overland Journal since the very beginning. So he, and he looks at all of that. Like, how do I fit a 37 in the stock location?
Yeah.
How do I make sure that it has the right payload? How do I make sure that the vehicle can be easily modified?
Yep.
And when you've got an organization that has people in charge that get it, you end up with vehicles like the Gladiator, which are an awesome choice.
Yeah. Like I was just I probably mentioned this, was on the Rubicon maybe a few months ago with Mark and some of the engineering team. Like, you can't fake driving skill.
Yep.
Like I've, we've both been on a lot of trails with designers and some are in velvet shoes selling 4-wheel drives and some are in hiking boots spotting you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's cool about Jeep.
Totally. Totally. All right. So I guess the other elephant in the room is we haven't talked about Land Rover yet. Does Land Rover currently sell a vehicle that you think is a pinnacle vehicle, something you'd drive around the world?
We'll find out, because obviously we're going to drive the Defender soon in Namibia, which I think is you don't send a car to Namibia if you're not trying to make a statement that it is worthwhile. But I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with Land Rover. I think they make fantastic vehicles for normal people. Yeah. That's the problem, is they're for normal people. It wouldn't. Would I love to drive a Range Rover around the world? Yeah. Would I actually choose that over, some of the other pinnacle vehicles we've mentioned? I don't know. I think I've lost a lot of confidence in Land Rover as far as an international vehicle. There's just so many systems, like the 200 series and the G-Class, those are luxury vehicles, right? But underneath, they're being used on mines somewhere.
Yep.
A Range Rover is not being used as a mine foreman's truck or a military vehicle anywhere.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's some general's vehicle in a country, but
sure,
he has an army behind him to fix it.
Right.
They're great vehicles. They're insanely capable off road for what they are.
Right.
But I feel like they're more like an X5 these days, and I wouldn't drive an X5 around the world.
Yeah, you can definitely see that the priority for the organization has shifted towards making a premium luxury SUV,
and their sales have skyrocketed because of. I mean, that's the thing.
Can you fault them for it? I don't know. Yeah.
I always give Land Rover, enthusiasts a little bit of grief. I mean, I love Land Rover. We're both into this because of Land Rover, totally, right? Like
100%.
I've owned a bunch of them. They're some of the most emotional vehicles I've ever driven or owned. But Land Rover enthusiasts don't buy new cars.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. I don't know a single person with a Discovery 5 right now that is taking it off road.
Right.
I know a lot of people with LR3s and LR4s. And back in the day, I knew a lot of people with D1s and D2s.
But they bought them used typically.
They're second, third, fourth owner vehicles. Yeah. And unfortunately, like for Land Rover owners, they don't come out of the factory with 100,000 miles for 10 grand.
Right.
They're expensive cars. They depreciate rapidly. You could certainly argue that buying a used Land Rover is the only way to buy a Land Rover. I mean, you can buy it, but I think it's just they have a different goal. Yeah.
And if you look at like Range Rover now is very much luxury. The Discovery is very much like this family, and they're doing well. They're actually selling quite well, but they're like this family truckster that has really good snow capability, and you could take it camping and everything like that. But it does seem like they're trying to make a statement around utility and durability with the new Defender. Now, you and I have seen the vehicle in person. We spent a lot of time with the car. We spent a lot of time with the engineers, so we know their intentions behind it. And I think their intentions are at least of the engineering team, I think are quite good. I think they missed the mark on some of the styling with the front end, but the engineering for a modern vehicle, their intentions are good. But once we get it out in the deserts of Namibia, we'll have a much better idea how
I think the vehicle in softer terrain will perform fantastically.
Yeah.
That much power in sand dunes with what is phenomenal suspension for something like that.
Yeah.
It's going to be really cool. A low center of gravity. They have a roof tent that'll be available for it. High roof load. I would love
high payload too. 1,800-pound payload.
I would love this time next year to revisit this. And I'm rooting so hard for Land Rover to be on this list.
Yeah.
I just, underneath, I kind of drilled one of their engineers on this. Okay, how is this different than a Discovery 5? And they told me the ball joint was 5 millimeters larger on the lower control arm.
Yeah.
Okay. A Discovery 5 wouldn't work for me. It's going to take a lot to convince me that, the changes that they have made.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do is look at the Defender as an entirely new model. I think once you attach the name Defender to it, it brings all of this heritage and legacy and passion that came with the original car.
Yeah.
And for me, it starts to taint my judgment on being able to assess the vehicle. because I have a Defender and I've driven Defenders all over the world, and I have a lot of passion for that model.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to come into it with fresh eyes, but let's see. Let's give it some time and see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, if it was the new Discovery, it would be the world's best Discovery.
Yeah, I know.
Ever.
I know. I know.
Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of because I owned a Mark III Range Rover, and it was one of my favorite vehicles for what it was, and it reminds me of like I just got a super utility version of a Mark III Range Rover.
Yeah.
Which to me seems exciting, and it seems honest and it seems appropriate. As a Defender, time's going to tell if it's going to be a good replacement for that vehicle.
I had somebody say to me recently, "Looks cool. What does it do for me that an LR4 doesn't for $15,000?"
Right.
And that's that repetitive cycle of the Land Rover thing is why would you buy one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, that'll be an interesting one to see as time develops, right?
Yeah. And then, internationally, we kind of touched on it. There's some obvious choices for pinnacle vehicles, 70 series. We put the Defenders on that list with new Puma motor. It drives great. I think it has a Mustang transmission now. It's kind of cobbled together from Ford.
What was the last year of that car? 2016.
Yeah.
So one of our thoughts with this pinnacle vehicle list was vehicles that were available within the last 10 years. So relatively new.
Yeah.
And you can find a 463 G-Wagon, which is what we'd recommend, a 461 G-Wagon, another great recommendation, a Y61 Patrol.
Yeah.
You can
highly underrated.
Yeah. Highly underrated. You can find that vehicle. They're still being sold in Saudi Arabia. They're being sold as the Gazelle and as the Falcon and other models that are
massive like gas engines in them.
Yeah, they are
supercharged and turbocharged and do all kinds of things too.
That's right. Yeah. So the Y61 Patrol is still a great consideration. Obviously, any variant of the 70 series is going to be really worthwhile.
Yeah.
And particularly if you buy it with the 18Z. Now, I like the motor, the VDJ, a lot. But the 18Z is a motor it's under stressed all the time.
Yeah.
If you're driving by yourself or with
really
your partner,
slow and you're not.
Yeah. You're not going to be in a rush.
But we had one. I mean, that was what was in my 70 and my Troopy, I should say our Troopy. And it was fine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to drive one in the United States.
No, it'd be brutal on the interstates.
I mean, but I think once you get out of the US, like it just really matter. You're not going as fast.
It just doesn't matter.
And just to touch on why we're focusing on things that are in the last 10 years is one, I think we want to reward companies for making, we want to give them a nod for continuing to make these vehicles, but vehicles are quite reliable.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about the 80 series. Yes, the 80 series is very reliable. So is the 200 series. But you're not going to find an 80 for under $15,000 that has under 200,000 miles right now.
It's tough.
Like you are at the point where even if you find a low mileage vehicle, you've timed out on things. Like you said, the rubber, the gaskets, that kind of stuff,
electrical wiring.
They're just not going to be as reliable. I mean, you have to want to drive that vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
It's my choice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one I'll actually do it in. But I've spent a Gladiator and refurbishment and purchase price on that vehicle. And
there's a lot of advantage to leaving on a big trip that's important to you. I mean, if you think about most people that are doing a big overland journey, they call it the trip of their lifetime, right? And that's because in many cases, it's the only trip that they will do like that in their life.
Yeah.
So you want to pad the experience in as many ways as you can. Modern vehicles are more safe.
Yes.
They have airbags, they have better handling, they have better stopping performance, they have advanced ABS, they have vehicle stability control. And it's very easy for like the curmudgeon-y, like old timer to say, you don't need those systems. Well, they say you don't need those systems because they don't understand how well they work.
Yeah.
And how many lives that they've actually saved.
How much fatigue is reduced by radar cruise control at no compromise on my Jeep, for example. Like, we just drove to Overland Expo East and back. It was almost 7,000 mile road trip. If I was in my Land Cruiser, I would have been able to do half the distance. I maybe not half, but
significant impact to the distance, right? That you can drive in a day. So driver fatigue is really important. Safety of yourself and your family members or your loved ones that you have along with you, or your best buddies that you've got along on this amazing trip. Why not make it safer? Why not make it more fuel efficient? Why not reduce the impact to the environment because of emissions? All of those things that modern vehicles have. It's easy to just take this puritanical approach of like, it's not an 80 series, so I don't want it. I don't think that works anymore. I think we have to be open-minded to the fact that technologies have changed. Vehicles have gotten better in many ways. A 2019 Wrangler is the most capable Wrangler ever made.
Yeah.
I can look back at my CJ7 that I had, and a new Rubicon would run circles around that truck. 100%. Would run absolute.
And that's the cool thing with the Wrangler. It's the only vehicle I know of that each year becomes more capable.
It just gets better and better. It just gets better and better.
Obviously people get, stuck on their model, and JK guys are like, oh, the JL's soft. Well, stop saying that, because in 5 years you're going to be driving a JL and you're going to be stoked about it.
What in most cases what they're saying when they're being critical of a new model is that they can't afford it. So now I've got to pick it apart so that I feel better about the fact that I can't afford it. But those are, like you said, those are the folks that in 10 years they'll be buying that vehicle because it'll be within their price range. And it doesn't mean that new vehicles don't have faults. They certainly do. But if you look at the Bison, it's the most capable mid-sized truck that GM has ever produced, and it's available today. The Gladiator is the Jeep pickup that we've always wanted, of course, inspired heavily by AEV's Brute. But the Gladiator it's the most capable Jeep pickup ever produced, and it's available today. The G-Wagon, the new model G-Wagon, still has triple differential locks. The 200 series is still as the engineer said, the most durable Land Cruiser they've ever made. So it's really easy to be dismissive of modern vehicles, but I think in many cases they're listening to consumer need and they're responding with trucks that people are passionate about.
People are going to car companies are going to have to specialize.
Yeah.
Will the need for a Hyundai Elantra exist? Elantra, I don't know how to say it. Whatever that thing is.
Whatever it is.
Whatever the cheap Hyundai or the cheap Kia or whatever, that's just going to be absorbed by ride sharing.
It's going to be a commodity.
Rental cars or that kind of thing. So I think if these car companies want to exist, I think a lot of them are on the right path, Jeep in particular.
Yep. Build vehicles that people are passionate about, build vehicles that solve problems.
Yeah.
And we've talked about a lot of those today. Those exist. These pinnacle vehicles are still available to us. And we encourage doing some research. I mean, don't just listen to what Matt and I are saying. This is based on our own experience, but a vehicle like a 200 series, when you look at the aftermarket options that are available for it and the global service, it's a very compelling choice.
Yes.
Right on, man. Well, we got a couple trips coming up. We got Africa.
Yeah. I'm spending about a month in Baja in a few weeks.
Yeah.
And
perfect.
then Africa. And I think we're going to try and do something, maybe Botswana, South Africa.
Yeah, that's right.
February.
Yeah. Go do some adventuring.
And then Alaska, Yukon, Northern Territories for me, probably 2 months next year. Hopefully leaving right after Overland Expo to avoid some of the mosquitoes.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you for spending time with us on the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady. You can find me on Instagram at Overland Journal. You can find me at Global Overland. And then we've got Matt Scott. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find my sarcastic ramblings on Instagram at Matt Explore. Follow me or don't. I don't know. You're gonna see a lot of cool trucks and also a lot of pictures of my Greyhound. So
tell people about your Greyhound. I think it's important.
Man, so this is little Dakar. He's silent. He's just been hanging out here. You probably didn't even know he was here. Yeah, super passionate about rescuing Greyhounds. I can't tell you how much of a positive influence this dog has been in my life. It's been a great experience. There's dogs out there that need homes. This guy, a little bit of separation anxiety and that kind of stuff, but he's sweet. Awesome. He's never chewed anything up. We had him for 2 months and we took him to Baja for 3 weeks in the back of a Land Cruiser. And I think these dogs are I don't know. I would say Greyhounds are very appreciative dogs.
Yeah. And they need homes.
They need homes. So
maybe take a look at that. When you look at your 200 series, switch over to another browser window and start looking for Greyhounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Everybody have a great week.
Yeah. Take care, guys.